What's up guys? My name is Zach Rowe. I am a kinesiologist, personal trainer, I do triathlons, I've been a lifelong athlete, and today I'm going to be talking about bioenergetics. Alright, so if all this looks kind of like gibberish, don't worry, I will explain it in a second, but I'll go over the bioenergetic continuum essentially, and then the different energy systems and times and whatnot. And then I'll go over some different kind of terms and even a common myth in just exercise in general. So I'll start off with the different energy systems, and first I'll explain the energy systems. You got your three main ones. Two you're probably very familiar with, aerobic and anaerobic, but then also we have the lactate system. Alright, so aerobic means with oxygen, so you're oxidizing either fats or carbohydrates for ATP, okay? Or you have your anaerobic system. There's multiple different ways of doing that. We'll go over there in a second, but it means without oxygen, alright? And then you have your lactic acid system, where you turn lactic acid, you turn it, essentially lactate, lactic acid, interchangeable, but you go through the Cori cycle and you produce ATP that way. I'll get to that in a second. Probably not as well known, okay? And then you have your different energy systems. So we're all familiar, I'm sure, with ATP, adenosine triphosphates. Everyone knows what ATP is. You don't have to worry about that. PC is phosphocreatine. So that's that powder that you see gym bros putting in their water. We'll go over that. Muscle glycogen. So you hold a good amount of glycogen, the glucose, the carbohydrates you eat in your food. You retain a lot of that. I can't remember off the top of my head. I probably should have looked that up. That's an easy thing to look up. But you hold enough glycogen in your muscles for around an hour and a half or so, plus or minus some time. Alright, so that's your muscle glycogen. And then lactic acid, which I already explained. That is an energy system. I'll explain more when we get to the lactic acid myth and how you produce energy that way. And then fatty acids, free fatty acids, alright? And then, so yeah, that's all. So now we'll go into time and whatnot. Oh, my leg is killing me. I need a better way to set this up, but this is good enough. Alright, so first we have time here, 1 to 4 seconds. So immediate fast burst. Think of like your power athletes, like your power lifters, or your Olympic lifters, or like something like that. Super fast, powerful. Obviously anaerobic. Without oxygen, you cannot get enough oxygen into your body that quickly to produce energy, right? It takes time. So that's anaerobic, and it uses ATP in the muscles. So you maintain a tiny bit of ATP just free floating in your body. But that's hard to maintain. Your body doesn't want to do that, right? If there's not a need for it, your body's not gonna have just a bunch of stuff lying around that it doesn't necessarily need, right? So you have a little bit of ATP sitting in your muscles that it'll pull from immediately, like straight off the rip. But that just dissipates extremely quickly. All right. So that's your anaerobic. That's your first kind of benchmark, and all these times are like loose, you know. Like it says 1 to 4. You might find some textbooks that say plus or minus a few seconds. Whatever. It doesn't really matter. All right. Then you have number 2, 4 to 20. Roughly, plus or minus some seconds, alright? Again, anaerobic, but now you're using ATP and phosphocreatine. So your body's beginning to produce ATP, and then you're using that phosphocreatine. So creatine that you take from supplements, it increases your internal phosphocreatine storages. It's for quick, fast, repeated bursts of energy. So that's why a lot of gym bros take it, because that's the type of exercise they're doing, right? It's like short duration. Roughly, you know, most your average gym bros aren't going to be doing sets longer than 20, even though they probably should. They're probably going a little bit heavier on the lower rep range side. You know, this is for another topic, but anywhere from like 6 to 30 reps is a good rep range for hypertrophy, which is, you know, like when I say your average gym bro is probably there for hypertrophy, correct? So if you're doing a long set of like 30 reps, it's probably going to be a little bit longer, but like I said, your average gym bro is not going to be doing that. But nevertheless, phosphocreatine, if you are an athlete that has a range of that kind of time where you have to like explode. Think sprinters, short distance, kind of like football, even though it's repeated kind of bursts, it would be good. I'm so uncomfortable. I'm trying to find a good spot to sit in. So yeah, that's your energy system there. Then remove up to 20 to 45, still not quite to a minute, still anaerobic. You're breathing in that oxygen throughout that time, but it hasn't gotten to the places it needs to start aerobic glycolysis yet. So anaerobic, and you're doing a combination of ATP, phosphocreatine, although probably most of that at that point has been used, and then muscle glycogen. That's the primary one there. Your ATP and your PC are going to be close to depleted at that point. All right, so depending on if you're supplementing with phosphocreatine, you might have more storages because you're taking it, right? But mainly muscle glycogen. So it's taking straight. So now you're going into anaerobic glycolysis. You're taking glycolysis is the breaking down of glucose, and you're doing it anaerobically without oxygen, right? And that's up until roughly a minute, no more than a minute. All right. 45 seconds to 2 minutes is a mixture of your anaerobic and your lactic acid system. Primarily muscle glycogen. So yeah, now your ATP, PC, it's completely gone. You're just focusing on that muscle glycogen to get you through the exercise that you're doing. So this is a little bit longer, like 2-minute bouts. Let me think. What would be something kind of like that? Maybe like a tennis kind of exchange. Maybe go from 45 to 2 minutes, like a longer kind of exchange back and forth. Let me think. What else would be something kind of like that? A little bit like a middle distance sprint, field events would be those kind of systems. There's a million different sports I could pick from, but those are the kind of couple come into my head immediately. And then next we have 2 minutes to 4 minutes, correct? Yep. That's your anaerobic and your aerobic. So you're still pulling from the muscle glycogen, and at this point your anaerobic glycolysis is kind of slowly starting to stop, and your aerobic glycolysis is starting to take over because it's more efficient. All right, using oxygen to break down that glucose and create energy. I can't remember the total amount of ATP that's produced or whatever. It doesn't really matter. It's just a little bit more efficient, and your body's going to convert to that once it starts to get oxygen in there and producing energy. And then also your lactic acid. So this is when you start to kind of get that muscle burn. Say like say you're doing like the mile at school or whatever, and you went out a little bit too hard, a little bit higher than your aerobic capacity could stand for, and you start to get that burn in your quads. That's what people attribute that to is lactic acid, correct? You always say that, oh, you got lactic acid pulling up in your muscles or whatever. Really, what that burn is metabolic acidosis, all right? It's different. Lactic acid is produced, but it's actually, you use it through the Cori cycle. I'll just go into the lactic acid method right now, myth right now since we're talking about it. You really take the lactic acid or the lactate, and it's glucose, pyruvate, and then lactate, and then lactate is transported through your blood from the muscle that you say quads through the blood to your liver, where the Cori cycle happens, where it reconverts it into pyruvate, and then using it produces ATP there. It doesn't use ATP, and reconverts it back into glucose, and then back through the blood system to the muscles that need it, and then that glucose is then used again, and it's kind of a cycle, right, of pyruvate, lactate, glucose, back and forth, back and forth. But this is a slow system because it's got to go from your muscles through your blood to your liver and back, right? So it's a slower system. So it's not your primary ATP producer. However, it's there, and that's a common myth that even a lot of fitness professionals still say to this day is lactic acid buildup that's causing that burn. It's metabolic acidosis. And that's also what causes you to get like basically failure in the particular muscle. Like, I can't think of the word, but you have your like systemic failure, but then you have your not isolated, there's a different word, but whatever failure. So like say you're doing a set and you just can't, like you're doing a bicep curl and you're just going, and you just can't do anymore. That's not metabolic acidosis. That's accumulating and not allowing for the myosin and the actin to slide past each other. All right. So that's there. And then anything over 4 minutes, it's purely aerobic. You're using your oxidative system, so you're oxidizing fats or glucose. And now this is a slower process, oxidizing free fatty acids. So in those long, like think of marathons, triathlons, ultra endurance events, your oxidative system can't keep up. And then, like I said, you can only carry so much glycogen in your muscles, so then you have to refuel with more glycogen to keep up that energy system, or not energy system, but just your body. That you need to give it the energy it can to keep going. And if you don't, people call it different things. Like in running, marathon running, they call it cut off. But just talking about the aerobic system, yeah, when you run out of energy, in like running they call it hitting the wall, in cycling they call it bonking. You want to obviously avoid that and refuel as you go to sustain that level of intensity that you're doing. Alright, so that's all the different systems here. Now we'll go into our continuum, and you can kind of already see the continuum here happening, but this is a chart that shows that. So you have your ATP percentage supplied, and then your performance time. So you have seconds here, and then minutes way out into here, and then your power output, your kilograms per second. So here, at this point, you have the highest power output per second and the greatest percentage of ATP being used. And that's obviously your ATP, your PC system, where that's your fast burst type of sports and athletes. And those type of people, you want to train that energy system. There's literally no point in getting into muscle glycogen, lactic acid, free fatty acids. When you do any kind of exercise longer than that, it's almost meaningless, really, unless it's just for general conditioning and cardio and keeping a good cardiovascular base. All right, and then as you can see, you slowly start to go down, and then you see your aerobic system doesn't initiate immediately. It takes a few seconds, but then you also gently start to increase with lactic acid system. So you start to produce more lactate. All right, and you see there's a point where you meet, and then it actually overtakes your ATP system. So you're primarily using, that's kind of right here in the middle, where you're using a combination of all three essentially, where you're using your ATP, your PC, muscle glycogen, and then you start to use lactic acid through the Cori cycle that starts to develop, and that happens. And then as you start to go up higher in aerobic, like long endurance, and at like a nice steady pace, your lactic acid system, it doesn't have to keep up. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm so uncomfortable. It doesn't have to keep up, so your power output greatly diminishes, but then also your lactic acid starts to peter off. So your lactic acid system is not being used at super high intensity or super low. It's kind of there in the middle. So when you're really trying to push the pace and cardiovascular exercise, you're gonna probably be right around in here where you're using your aerobic system for sure, but your ATP PC system is completely out of it, and you're just trying to regulate that lactic acid system, make it so you're not going over threshold, which is one of our key terms, anaerobic threshold, and that's the accumulation of metabolic acidosis, where you can't sustain it for indefinitely, essentially. You want to be, if you're doing any kind of long distance aerobic exercise, you want to be slightly like two percentage points below, 2 or 3, as close as you can get to that percentage of your heart rate max, without going over it. Therefore, you're not, what like they call it in cycling, is like not burning your matches or whatever, you know. So you have the highest amount of power output, but you can sustain it for the longest at the highest intensity. If you're not worried about speed at all, then you can just, and you're just trying to get it done, you can just go super duper slow. You're not going to be in that lactic acid system, so you're not going to feel that burn. It's not going to be super uncomfortable, but you will get it done for sure. And that's where that burn and that pain, that uncomfortableness comes from. So we have our anaerobic threshold. VO2 is just your oxygen uptake. So how much oxygen, or yeah, that's just what it is essentially. And then your VO2 max, you probably heard this VO2 max testing, is your maximal oxygen uptake. So you can do treadmill tests, or you can do different tests where you kind of calculate for it if you don't have the mass thing that's put over to check your inspiration and expiration. But that's the total oxygen uptake. At a certain point, endurance athletes, you max out on it. You can't get your VO2 max any higher. So what really makes the difference in elite endurance athletes is your anaerobic threshold, because this technically right here, this arch can be shifted and moved slightly higher, or slightly lower rather. So this arc here, you can shift it this to your left, so then you can maintain a higher power output, but then go deeper into your lactic acid system, so you're not accumulating as much, but are higher power output. And that's what really sets elite endurance athletes apart from others. All right, VO2 max. Aerobic threshold is just kind of down in here, or actually, sorry, it's way up here rather. Your threshold for aerobic exercise is like that super slow pace I was telling you about, where you're not accumulating any lactic acid. It's kind of like up here. It's like your steady state recovery kind of runs or cycles or whatever aerobic exercise you're doing. That's your aerobic threshold. And then the lactic acid myth I already went over. Alright, so it's important to know what sport you're competing in and what energy systems you're using, and really train those systems. A lot of them are very complicated, like soccer, basketball, football. You're kind of using all of them really, right? Because you need a good cardiovascular base to run up and down the field of the court, but then you have explosive anaerobic movement, like jump in a dunk or block, or to go in and do a kick in a soccer game. So and then others are super simple, like powerlifting and Olympic lifting, where you're just right in here, that ATP in the muscle, PC. So knowing your bioenergetic pathways and what you're using for energy systems and energy supply is important to train those in your training. And I can kind of go over that in specific sports and how to train those systems if this gets a good response. But that's about it. That's all I want to cover here. Hopefully you learned something, and that's it. Peace. Oh wait, I should plug all my stuff. Performance sorry. I'll be certified fitness is my training business. Check out my website. I'll have a link down below. Check out my Instagram. Check out my Twitter. Performance Academy podcast I do with my friend Josh over on my YouTube page. I'll link that as well. And yeah, that's it. Peace.